Okay, let's pray. Father, we just thanks for this day. Thanks for the crew that was able to come out to help with the filming today, and we just pray that you'll bless everyone and keep people safe on the roads around here. In Jesus' name, amen. We don't have a crowd here today because we canceled church because we have a level 2 snow emergency in Ohio. Now, for those of you like in Florida and Hawaii that don't understand what that is, a level 2 snow emergency, for you the equivalent would be I think somebody throwing a snow cone on the sidewalk in Hawaii would be a level 2 snow emergency or something. So I know you people suffer all the time over there. And I know you're going to say it snows up on Mauna Kea or Mauna Loa, and that's irrelevant. So, and maybe even Haleakala. So today's update, now I'm going to admit I saw this, somebody posted it in a Facebook group, Facebook comment, and I thought it was kind of cute. So today's update is titled, Days of They Don't Know a Lot. Days of They Don't Know a Lot. And I think you'll understand, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the cultural things and social things. We're going to talk a little bit about government and a lot about the Middle East and Israel today. And we'll get through as much of this as we can. As usual, I have way more that I'm sure that will take up the time. In Romans chapter 1, verse 31, just to kind of set the stage, Paul, writing to the church at Rome, says this. He describes people that are without understanding, covenant breakers, without natural affection, implacable, unmerciful, who, knowing the judgment of God, that they which commit such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them. And then in Luke 17, a passage we haven't referred to too much lately, Jesus lays out a pattern of what it's going to be like in the days leading up to the coming of the Son of Man. And he gives two examples, two patterns that you should look for. And when it's like these days, then you know that the Lord's coming is getting closer. In verse 26 of Luke 17, it says, And as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be also in the days of the Son of Man. They did eat, they drank, they married wives, they were given in marriage until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and the flood came and destroyed them all. And then in verse 28, he gives another pattern. Likewise, also as it was in the days of Lot, they did eat, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they builded. But the same day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. Even thus it shall be in the day when the Son of Man is revealed. So we know that this is a pattern that we should look for. So let's just look at some of the things that are going on. I think you'll see how these relate. This was, there's no sound to this. This was somebody who was on I-95 in Baltimore yesterday. It was icy. There was backed up traffic, and here comes a tanker. He happened to catch it on video. So I don't know if I-95 is going to be open for a while, because when we had that happen in Columbus, if you remember, out in the west side, a tanker that crashed under a bridge and caught on fire, it melted or caused the girders to become insufficiently strong to bear the traffic, so it was closed for a while. So terrible crash there. This is an interesting thing. The people on the left, the Democrats, are really, really upset with what's going on in North Carolina. And to understand people on the left, you have to understand that they engage in projection. So if they're saying that so-and-so is a bigot or a hater or something like that, it's because they're a hater or a bigot. That's a general rule of thumb that you can apply. And so here the Democrats are upset at the Republicans' power grab. And what are they upset? Well, they have a Republican governor and a Republican legislature. They voted in a Democratic governor, but he doesn't take office for a while. So the Republicans have passed legislation that restricts certain of the governor's powers. And this is what the Democrats do all the time. and nobody ever says anything, but now they're very upset about it. The other thing that's kind of going on, I'll try to find the other slide that goes with this, is this thing about the Electoral College and are the Russians hacking, did the Russians hack the election? The Republicans have been pretty adamant that there were attempts to hack their servers at the Republican National Committee, but they were unsuccessful because of the security measures employed. Hillary Clinton, who had a server in somebody's bathroom in an apartment in Colorado, I believe, her server was unsecured. The Democratic National Committee server was unsecured, and a lot of emails were lost or were leaked to the press and to the public. So here's my take on it. It's the Democrats' own fault. And you should live your life these days that anything you do online could be revealed. I mean, we see this happen all the time. And I know people are upset about privacy and everything, but remember, God knows, what we're concerned about people finding out about our lives, God knows about anyway. So we should live our lives for the Lord and like we're acting for Him. And so you need to be careful online because these things will be revealed. The interesting thing in all this hacking allegations is that no one is saying that any of the emails that were leaked are untrue in any way. I have a video clip of somebody that I wanted to play. Let me see if I can find it here. Here's a very esteemed gentleman of the left who has some comments about the Electoral College and what should be done.
Listen, we are hours away now from the Electoral College coming together on Monday. This needs protest. This needs people's voices. You can go to Vigils for America. I think it's .org. And they have the list of all the state protests at the state capitals this weekend and on Monday. People need to have their voice heard. Don't say to yourself, well, what's the use? Nothing's going to happen. You don't know that. You don't know that. That's why we have to keep fighting. We have to fight all the way to Inauguration Day and then be ready for them to start the day after the inauguration, passing law after law after law.
And you think protesting on inauguration?
So, look, here's what I think will happen. Nothing's going to happen. There might be one or two Republican electors that flip. There might be some Democrats that flip and vote for somebody. Let's say that enough electors switch. Let's say Trump has 306, so they have to have 37 or 38 flip for him not to win, 37. And it's possible that could happen. Statistically, it's highly improbable. Could it happen? Yeah, it's possible. But all the surveys that people have done, pretty credible polling of the electors, shows just one guy who appears to have some very severe credibility problems in his own life is said he won't vote for Trump. There have been a number of electors on the Democratic side who said they may vote for somebody like John Kasich. So what happens if nobody gets 270, it will go to the House of Representatives. The state delegations have a majority controlled by the Republicans. Each state gets one vote. So if it goes to the House of Representatives, Donald Trump will be the president. And the only people that they could vote for are the top 3 Electoral College vote getters. So if Trump had 260 and Hillary had 260 and Kasich was able to, for whatever reason why somebody would do this, somebody voted for him, maybe 8 people voted for him or 18 people voted for him, it doesn't make any difference. If the Congress, the House, can only consider those 3 people. And as I said, I don't think anything is going to happen on this. When I make criticisms of Bethel Church in Reading, I get a lot of, it's one of the few times I get really hate email. But I have major problems with what goes on at Bethel. I know Pastor Steve has major problems with what goes on at Bethel. It's very influential, and much of what goes on there is not biblical in the least. Chris Van Lauten is an associate pastor there on staff, and I have videos of him saying just some I would hope that his remarks when he says things at women's conferences and other places that he speaks are unprepared, that they're extemporaneous. If he's preparing those remarks and saying them, then I have even more problems with what's going on at Bethel. But he has a blog post that he put up this week, Rich Jesus, Poor Jesus. It's titled Batman and the Pope. And what happened was he was invited to go meet with the Pope, and apparently they lost his luggage, and so he ended up, the only thing he had was blue jeans and a Batman t-shirt that he wore to fly to Rome. And he was wondering, how is the Pope, and he says in here, I imagine myself in my old ragged Batman shirt and tattered jeans in the midst of pastors dressed in three-piece suits and Pope Francis in his royal robes. Now, why does that not bother him? Why do the riches of Rome, a false church, not bother him? I don't understand that, but he followed it up with a Facebook post directing people to this blog post that says this: Jesus became poor for a reason. His celestial mission was to make us wealthy. He didn't become poor so he could demonstrate the power of poverty. Quite the contrary. Actually, he became poor to demonstrate the process to prosperity. This has nothing biblical to back it up. This is classic word faith, heretical teaching. Don't pay attention to this guy. Ignore him. Flee from him. These are wolves, and they will damage your faith. Cecile Richards this week, what happened was Obama has put in place regulations that prevent states from not funding Planned Parenthood if they receive federal funds to help out with Medicare, Medicaid, and that type of thing. Now, all Trump has to do when he comes into office on January 20th is do a paragraph order revoking that, and it's over. But Cecile Richards, she's happy. POTUS, Obama has cemented his legacy as a champion for women's health. Now we continue to fight for our patients' access to care. Killing a baby is not health care. The fact that it is considered that by people on the left shows how twisted a world that we live in. She says down there, breaking, new rule protects health care for 4 million Americans. But the fight isn't over. The babies don't get health care. They get killed. And this is a problem. And I think God's going to judge us at some point very severely that this has been allowed to go on. We know that one of the things that people are trying to do is put in place a new world order. And sometimes these things come very directly. Sometimes they're a little bit more subtle. So, for example, this was on the World Economic Forum. They put on the Davos conference under Fourth Industrial Revolution. And this lady posted a blog, Welcome to 2030. And we know there's a global agenda 2030 to put in place a lot of these controls for sustainable development and really controlling how people live. I own nothing, have no privacy, and life has never been better. And she's celebrating this. And this just shows how far down the road some of these people and their thinking have gone. So about a month ago in Dubai, they had this conference, the Global Futures Council, part of the World Economic Forum, held this conference. And here is this lady who posted it. I own nothing, have no privacy, and life has never been better. Now, sometimes what they are talking about and putting in place this sort of globalist, one world agenda and control is a little bit subtle. But listen to what they interviewed one of the people behind organizing this conference, and listen to what he says.
And just how do you do that? How do you share the thoughts and ideas discussed among council members here at this forum in this magnificent resort in Dubai with the rest of the world? Again, advanced technology.
This is a unique hub. What you're seeing here is some of the experts being invited to speak live on Facebook.
Oh, this is Facebook Live.
On any given moment, you're literally having thousands, tens of thousands of people exposed to the ideas in real time here. It was not possible, a few years ago.
The fourth industrial revolution has become, to many of us, a reality that we actually feel and experience in our day-to-day lives. How has your discussion evolved over the past year, and where are you right now?
We, humans, we are the ones that direct the fourth industrial. We've called it that. We have the power to call it something else. We have the power to move it in another direction. So this is not about adapting to a new reality. It's about shaping the future reality.
So you see how it's sort of subtle what they're saying is about how they want to control and shape the way people think. Now, when I bring up things like the Economist cover and the pictures on there, I'm not using those as a predictive element. I'm only using it to show what these people that are in charge and that control things want to accomplish. We know that the only true prophecy comes from the Word of God. But what's interesting is when the people that are in charge, these globalists, start talking about things that we see in the prophetic scriptures, that's when we really need to pay attention to what's going on. And so here's this guy talking about, we can get tens of thousands of people watching on Facebook Live. And it's the wave of the future. Now, I know some pastors. I think Jack Hibbs has started doing a Facebook Live thing he did one on Thursday morning this week. And that's a way to reach people. So the church might as well use these technologies while they're available. This was also tweeted out in connection with this conference, how gene editing is changing the world. And it shows how, we're just going to change people. We're going to edit their genes. We're going to edit their DNA. And we're going to make people live a long time. Somebody like Ray Kurzweil, I remember the cover from Time magazine, 2045, the year man becomes immortal. I think that was about 5 years ago now. They've moved the clock up a little bit closer. They think this immortality thing is going to happen sometime before 2045. And I think this 2030 agenda, the transhumanism, gene editing, all of this stuff is connected to that kind of overarching desire to create a perfect person. This is Tower of Babel stuff. What happens in Jewish prophecy is that a narrative is laid out that's prophetic, or a story is laid out, and it's prophetic. So, for example, what happened at the Tower of Babel will be recapitulated. It will reappear in the end times. And trying to make yourself as God and immortal, that's God's stuff. That's not what humans are allowed to do. But humans are going to try. They were trying it back at the time of the Tower of Babel. They're going to try again. And they're trying it now on a massive global scale. I mean, all of these leaders of the world and everything are going to these conferences and being indoctrinated in this. So it's something you need to pay attention to. Now, the main reason for the title today, They Don't Know a Lot, is this. And Matt Walsh has a great blog post on it. You ought to look it up because his thoughts track mine on this story in National Geographic. Now, look, I grew up with National Geographic. I love National Geographic. Great pictures of historical places and geography and all that stuff. I can remember in third grade that we had this thing called an opaque projector. Now I'm dating myself. A lot of people don't know what an opaque projector is. It's essentially a big can, and it was able to project an image from a book. So I remember getting a razor blade and cutting the pictures out of National Geographic and putting them on white paper. I was doing PowerPoint in the 60s, okay? Unfortunately, I'm not that smart, because if I had been really smart, I would have turned it into a computer program, and I would be doing these updates from, Hawaii or someplace like that, from my veranda overlooking a golf course or something. So I love National Geographic, but it is, look, it has an evolutionist agenda, but it's really deteriorated. And so now the new magazine that will be coming out soon is the Gender Revolution, special issue, Gender Revolution. And the picture of this person on the cover is a boy who lives as a girl. Meet Debbie. And then if you go to the Human Rights Campaign website, you can get some information on Debbie, the mother of this boy, who is now living as a girl. But there's an interesting fact in this article. And listen to what it says at the Human Rights Campaign website. Debbie's daughter, Avery, was 4 years old when she proclaimed her true gender identity to her mother. It was a boy. Debbie, now listen to this phrase, Debbie, the mother, who is a Southern Baptist, admitted that at first she didn't quite know how to process the information. She acknowledged that it was not a phase and that Avery was simply being true to who she is. This is a boy. Now, well, here's a little video clip from the Human Rights Campaign website.
When Avery was 4 years old, we were walking through the store holding hands, and she just looked at me and said, Mom, you think that I'm a boy and you talk about me being a boy, but I'm really a girl on the inside, right? I didn't really know how to process that.
Well, you shouldn't have known how to process that, because human nature should tell you that you have a boy and you should raise him as a boy. But the constellation of people that gather around these troubled kids, these adults, are engaged. Dr. McHugh, who used to head the transgender clinic at Johns Hopkins, says this is child abuse. And I agree wholeheartedly. These people are abusing this young man, this young boy. But now it's on the cover of National Geographic. Debbie, who is Southern Baptist, admitted that at first she didn't quite know how to process the information. Avery was simply being true to who she is. Do you see how she's changed? She now just refers to her son as she. This is insanity. And so this is why I say they don't know a lot. They don't understand what is going on. They've been given over to this reprobate mind. I don't know, I wasn't around in the days of Lot. I don't think Lot had to put up with this nonsense. I think we've gone beyond where Lot was. So that is a big problem and an indicator of the end times. Here's another indication of insanity. As you know, a couple weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I guess, there was an attack by a Somalian Muslim. He drove his car into a group of students, got out with a knife. Now, it's been described, you think it's a kitchen knife or maybe a steak knife or something. He was shot dead. There was a policeman who shot him dead. The whole incident was less than about a minute from when he started to when he was dead. And I'm grateful for this policeman taking quick, decisive action. But here's what happened at Ohio State, okay? Now, they have a good football team, okay? But they have morons that have been admitted to the campus, okay? Don't tell me that Ohio State has really high bar for admissions when this moronic stuff is allowed to go on. I haven't heard the administration respond to this. They won't, And here's what happened. This was in the Lantern on their Twitter feed yesterday. Abdul Razak Ali Artan, who I believe attends a mosque down there about a mile from the campus. It's in a Somalian community. That mosque, by the way, has been tied to 6 terror incidents. This year in Columbus, we have had 2 Somalian Muslim terror attacks. Now, my understanding is this is the knife that was used. It looks more like a machete or something to me. And it was a machete that was used at the attack at the restaurant out on the northeast side. This is insanity. And so what were they doing? They're adding him to the students group's list of people of color killed by police. So now he's a victim. A terrorist is a victim to these idiots. They've lost the ability to reason. It's embarrassing. They should be embarrassed, but they never are. But if you think the insanity is just with the students, it's not. Here's a press release the other day from Judicial Watch. And what Judicial Watch did was they made a Freedom of Information Act request on the Department of Homeland Security. You know, they're the people who run the little kabuki theater that you have to go through when you get on a plane to make sure everybody thinks they're safe. So what did the Department of Homeland Security do? At 3 airports, Los Angeles, Minneapolis, and John Glenn Airport, formerly Port Columbus, airport I fly in and out of a lot of time, they did a community engagement tour where they took Muslims through areas of the airport that you or I could never get to because they're secure areas of the airport. They took them into the baggage area. They took them back to show them where holding cells were and all this other thing. It took them a while. You can read the documents that Judicial Watch released. Here's the letter responding. It says, well, we've redacted some of the information, but some of the information is very interesting that you get. For example, there were people that were on the visitor list that were referenced in 4 closed cases. In other words, they had been on the Department of Homeland Security investigation or watch list. He is going to ask the U.S. Attorney about, name redacted, his case is still open, but barely, and he has come up before. He is going to find out what they did in the past when he requested access at these type of events. So he may have been given access before, even though he was investigated. This is insanity. And so here's the agenda of the visit to Minneapolis Airport. And you'll see that one of the things that they do is passenger experience from deplaning to departure, primary processing, global entry, related policies and services, holding cells, interview rooms, secondary baggage. I don't understand this. This just doesn't make sense to me, but this is where we live. Paul Krugman, he won a Nobel Prize for economics. And he's a leftist. He is a complete idiot. Someone in response to these tweets that he did the other day say, why don't you just stick with telling us about economics that you obviously don't understand either? He says this thought, there was rightly a cloud of illegitimacy over Bush because of the 2000 election, dispelled wrongly by 9/11. Creates some interesting incentives for Trump. And now look at what he says. He gives this 4-part tweet as to what he's, and this is a major columnist, writer for the New York Times. At some point, Trump will surely use patriotism card to distract from tainted election and effects of his anti-populist policies. No, it won't be a false flag terror attack, too hard and no need. It will either exploit a real terrorist attack or involve a U.S. version of Falklands War, picking a fight with foreign power to rally home base Iraq had some elements of that. So anyone who thought they were going against neocon policies was another kind of useful idiot. So he is correct. There is a useful idiot involved in that tweet, and we know who that is. We don't have to go through that again. Another thing that's going on at the same time that's kind of against this globalist agenda, but it's causing all the people that want a globalist agenda to double down, is the collapse and disintegration of the European Union. Now, George Friedman did a great speech about a year ago at the Chicago Policy Council, I believe it was, Geopolitical Futures, about why Europe is in this perpetual state of conflict and how he doesn't think it will ever be united. Here is the leader of the Prime Minister of Slovakia, who is also doubting about whether the EU continue. Look at this. The relatively moderate Slovaks are hardly immune from the right-wing nationalist and populist forces threatening to unravel the European Union. Slovakia is one of the so-called four Visegrad countries, along with Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic. Slovaks are showing the same doubts about the future of Europe as the others and showing some of the same vulnerabilities to right-wing nationalism and Moscow's siren song. Over schnitzel, pilsner, and cherry compote, Mr. Herjek talked about how he was troubled by the migrant crisis and aid to richer countries in the Eurozone like Greece. Slovaks are trying to adjust to the risks of capitalism, but now the EU is trying to do something in between, he said. It's trying to support countries that are lazy, like Greece. Why should we take care of them? We're poor, a lot poorer than they are. His colleague, Ivan Feik, said that with Europe so divided, it's complicated, everyone wants something different, everyone thinks how best to survive and looks only at what the EU can offer them. And it's a problem. As for the refugees, Mr. Feik said, Muslims are a big unknown to us, so people are more worried. As long as the refugees are Christian, it's no problem. Diversity in Europe can work over time with proper management and regulations, he said, but it can go wrong with too many different kinds of people. If we're not careful with all the divisions, we'll end up with nothing. Slovakia, like other Visegrad countries, rejected the demands of Brussels to take even a small quota of refugees, breaking the traditional consensus of solidarity among member states of the European Union. And the result of this immigration is just horrific. It's particularly in Germany. There's a map. I didn't have a chance to grab a screen grab of it. That you can find online that has immigrant-related sexual crime attacks in Germany over the past year, and it's like over six figures. It's over 100,000 all across Germany, and it's a huge problem. And Germany is disintegrating because of it. And frankly, and they're talking about continuing to bring them in at the same level that they did last year when it became such a huge problem. And they're upset with Greece and other countries that won't take them. They're fighting with Turkey over it. Turkey's effectively out of the EU, even though they've never really been formally made a member. And Europe is just falling apart. But the globalists are ratcheting down. You know, we're gonna get this back together. I don't know what'll happen. We'll just have to watch. But it's interesting that everything is in such turmoil, and it's really come apart just in the last year and a half. Really, just in the last year. It's incredible to watch. Well, let's look at the Middle East. And well, no, that's Venezuela. So we have about every continent now. Venezuela is in complete collapse. People are trying to leave. They have boat people coming from Venezuela. They're trying to get out because they've banned a lot of the forms of cash. People can't get food. Here are people lining up to exchange the cash that they can't use anymore in the store for smaller denominations. But then what happens is the banks and ATMs are always out of money. So people can't get money. They can't get money. They can't get food. They can't get food. They start getting a little bit angry and panic, and Venezuela is in total meltdown. So here's the Middle East, the fall of Aleppo. This is a picture taken from a drone the other day that flew over Aleppo. And we can see that Aleppo is effectively destroyed. Now, there's a lot of question about who's at fault in Aleppo. And here's my take. Everybody. There is a narrative going around that Assad and Putin are these great protectors of humanity. That is a false narrative. There were rebels in a whole bunch of groups, 50 or more, that opposed Assad, that started riots back in 2011, and people thought it would be good to get rid of Assad. Now, we can argue about whether it would be good to get rid of Assad or not. Assad, to me, was sort of someone who could be managed and controlled, but he was a bad guy. This narrative that Assad is this great person is just a pack of lies. Assad is a thug. He is a creep. He and his father have used chemical weapons on their own people, and people in Syria hated Assad. Now, some loved him. He was very good about keeping his Alawite sect and some others. He and his father helped destroy the government of next door Lebanon, which is now under the effective control of Hezbollah, a Shiite terrorist group. So don't tell me that Assad or Putin are good guys. Putin went in there with the claim, I think this was May of 2015, I'm going to take out ISIS. There's been very little done by Russia against ISIS over the last year and a half. Not much. A little bit, but not much. What they've done is they've tried to get part of the country under the control of Assad. The rebel groups were hanging out in Aleppo. They had effective control of Aleppo. And so what has happened is they have bombed the living daylights out of Aleppo. And this is what you see. The city is effectively destroyed. People are fleeing. There were reports of summary executions on the street. I'm not sure that those were correct. But part of it was Assad, with the help of Putin over the last year and a half, wanted to get rid of the people who were opposing him. So what did they do? They destroyed the places that they were living. And now people have to get up and move someplace else. What's the result of that? So when the Syrian civil war started in March, effectively in about March of 2011, there were 21 million people in Syria. Over 11 million of the people that lived in Syria in 2011, 11 million of the 21 million don't live where they used to live. They've had to move someplace else. There's massive refugee camps in Jordan and Turkey and Lebanon. And so over half of the country has been displaced. I mean, imagine if over the last 5 years, half of the people that were in New York no longer had a place to live. They had to leave and go someplace else. It's on that scale. Assad has declared that Aleppo is liberated. Everything is chaotic. This is a famous Umayyad mosque in the old section of Aleppo. It's a historic mosque. It is probably, I believe, about 1,000 years old. It's probably as old as Al-Aqsa Mosque, maybe over 1,000 years in Jerusalem. And this is what it looked like 5 years ago. This is what it looks like today. You can see that the large minaret there back in the corner has been destroyed. It's full of trash. Here's a guy planting a Syrian flag in the plaza there. So Aleppo is gone, and there's concern that Damascus won't be far behind. And what was done in Aleppo, destroying the city to get people to leave that opposed you, could happen in Damascus. And then it's complicated by something further, and I'm not remembering. This was in the paper called The Observer. And this is a very interesting discussion. Will an emboldened Syria attack Israel? Listen to what this says. The most worrisome byproduct of Russia's involvement in Syria is that Russia's very presence has emboldened dictator Bashar al-Assad. Russia now occupies a prominent place at the center of the theater of Syrian operations. That presence has given the strong man the confidence to act with more strength. Assad is now confident enough to admit that the situation enveloping his country and devastating his countrymen is dangerous. He is saying things that he would never dare to utter until now. The worry is that because of this newfound arrogance, Assad may attack Israel. See, in the past, Assad pretty much let everything alone, but now he's been able to get rid of these rebel groups, these people that have been causing him problems all the way through his reign and the one of his father that preceded him. The attack, this article says, would be retaliation for Israel's most recent missile strike at an Air Force base just outside of Damascus. Israel's alleged strike is the proper diplomatic term because, true to form, Israel has neither confirmed nor denied this attack or any of their operations. This policy is in place especially for situations like this, strikes at sensitive targets in Syria. The target was just west of Damascus, more specifically a base housing weapons of mass destruction that Syria planned to hand off to Hezbollah. Some of those weapons, I believe, they got from Saddam Hussein. Israel generally does not take sides in the Syrian conflict, the article continues. When Israel does conduct a strike in either Lebanon or Syria, it is for one of two reasons. Either to stop the transfer of weapons that could change the balance of power in the region, or to stop activity that would allow Hezbollah to significantly improve their weapons cache. Destroying weapons of mass destruction on their way to Hezbollah falls into both categories. Damascus and Assad could have ignored the attack, as they have done in the past, or the military could have reported the attack to the press as an accidental explosion. But this time Syria publicly responded. Syria media reported the attack as surface-to-surface missiles shot from Israel into Syria. Some people might ask why Israel used these missiles when their cost is 3 to 4 times more than an ordinary missile fired from a fighter jet. They both achieve the same goal. This too involves Russia. Russia has moved their S-300 and S-400 anti-aircraft weapons into place. These are highly sophisticated defensive weapons, and I talked a little bit about this last Sunday. Israel, by the way, this week did take delivery of 2 F-35s, very advanced fighter aircraft that Israel is enhancing with its own technology. Had Israel simply sent their fighter jets, it's possible Russians would have locked onto them. Surface-to-surface missiles can safely be shot from Israel into Syria, literally flying under the radar. Standard Israeli jets would have been spotted, and the Russians may well have passed that information on to the Syrians in time for them to scatter and avoid being destroyed. Syria knows Russia has not given them carte blanche to act against Israel. Assad is free to deal with the rebels as he sees fit. In other areas, he needs to tread more carefully. Russia wants to avoid direct conflict with Israel. However, Russia, especially military officers in the field, might be very interested in determining Israel's preparedness in case of attack. Israel's readiness would certainly be measured if Syria and or Hezbollah were to attack. So, the situation is very fluid. The situation is very volatile. I do not have the video clip, but I have a clip. I just didn't have time to edit it for today. Of the head of the IDF, who was talking at the Jerusalem Diplomatic Conference a month ago. And he made a very interesting comment that I think plays into the whole Bible prophecy scenario. And it said this, or he said this: Israel, with everything going on around us and the Arab Spring and all the countries falling apart and people on our borders, Israel is in the eye of the storm, but it's not in the storm. Israel remains very peaceful. It does seem to have control, but it has major problems on excuse me all of its borders. It is Hezbollah has well over 100,000 missiles. The Russian sophisticated radar, which I think Israel can overcome, but Russia's always trying to figure out how Israel might be overcoming it. So it's sort of a game, and we know that eventually Israel, this coalition of nations, is going to attack Israel. It appears, though, that Syria, Damascus is gone before that happens. I think that's a fairly good timeline of prophetic events. So how is this going to happen? We know that Hezbollah is in Syria. We know that Hezbollah is on the borders of the Golan. We know that Hezbollah wants to attack Israel. They want to annihilate Israel. They want to get rid of Israel. We know that they were getting exchange at this military base in Damascus. And we also know that Israel is not of a mind to tolerate this anymore. So the whole thing is very volatile. The prophetic scenarios that we've talked about a lot could come about very quickly. Here's another sort of outgrowth of what's going on in Syria is the rise of Iran as a hegemonic power in the Middle East. This week, Theresa May, the new Prime Minister of Great Britain, went to a conference in Dubai, and she got the Iranians really upset because she called them a regional threat. Here's what she said.
I want to assure you that I am clear-eyed about the threat that Iran poses to the Gulf and the wider Middle East. The UK is fully committed to our strategic partnership with the Gulf and working with you to counter that threat. We secured a deal which has neutralised the possibility of Iran acquiring nuclear weapons for over a decade. It has already seen Iran remove 13,000 centrifuges, together with associated infrastructure, and eliminate its stock of 20% enriched uranium.
And Breitbart was reporting, based on a couple articles, Aleppo's fall signals the rise of an emboldened radical Shiite axis. A lot of that information comes from a MEM, the Middle East stands for Middle East Research Institute. And they usually have a lot of good videos. It's a website that you should peruse if you're interested in this. And they had a big two-part series here titled The Regional Vision of Iran's Islamic Regime and Its Military Political Implementation. Now, again, when secular people are talking about things that are laid out in the Bible, I get very interested. And we know that Iran, Persia, will be involved in this attack on Israel in the latter days, and could be very soon. It could be this week. Listen to what the introductory part of this article says. Since the beginning of the regime of Iran's Islamic Revolution, the regime of Iran's Islamic Revolution has championed the idea of exporting its revolution to the entire Muslim world. This doctrine is rooted in the thinking of the revolution's founder, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, particularly in his book, The Islamic Government. In the book, he presented his perception negating the existence of peoples and states in Islam and aspiring to actualize Islamic unity. Khomeini defined himself as a Muslim, not as an Iranian or a Shiite, and the revolution as Islamic, not Iranian or Shiite. In his view, nationalism is an imperialistic plot to weaken and divide the Islamic world, and Islamic unity is the way to restore Islam to its greatness. The regime in Iran is the jumping-off point for a comprehensive Islamic revolution, and exporting the revolution is the tool for attaining Islamic unity. This concept, which Iranian revolutionaries, ideologues have called al-Qura, one of the names of Mecca, considers Iran the true Mecca. That is, Iran is the religious, spiritual, and political center of the Muslim world. These ideologues have set out a vision and mission to spread revolutionary Shiite Islam across the geographic and religious region of the Islamic world. And they, by all estimates, are being relatively successful in doing that as we talk today. According to this doctrine, Iran appropriates the leadership rule of the Sunni Islam that is based on Mecca and on that city's historic role in Islamic history as part of the generations of political and religious struggle between the Shia and the Sunni. This constitutes an additional layer in the intra-Islamic philosophical discussion on what form an Islamic regime should take, and of how to rebuild the Islamic world after centuries of repeated defeat by Western civilization. So this is very significant prophetically. A couple of weeks ago, the president who would give Barack Obama a run for his money in a poll to determine the worst president in American history, Jimmy Carter, wrote an opinion piece in the New York Times called "America Must Recognize Palestine." And I'm not going to go through and read this, but essentially he says the only way to get peace in the region is a two-state solution. Everybody is trying it. And he says the simple but vital step this administration must take before its term expires on January 20 is to grant American diplomatic recognition to the state of Palestine, as 137 countries have already done, and help it achieve full United Nations membership. Today, 38 years after Camp David, the commitment to peace is in danger of abrogation. Israel is building more and more settlements, displacing Palestinians and entrenching its occupation of Palestinian lands. Well, the rest of it goes on is typical Jimmy Carter. Now, this past week or 10 days ago, Alan Dershowitz, he's a left-wing, very liberal law professor. I think he's a professor emeritus now at Harvard. Very excellent lawyer, superb lawyer, but he's a man of the left. But he supports Israel. And they was asked some questions about at this conference that he was speaking at in Israel. What do you think about the peace prospects? And here's what he said, and specifically in response to Jimmy Carter's column.
People don't know this. The villain of Camp David, when Ehud Barak, people don't know this. The villain of Camp David, when Ehud Barak and Bill Clinton made the most generous offers to the Palestinians, guess who told Arafat to turn it down? Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter was advising Arafat, and he told him that if he accepted that deal, which would have given statehood to the Palestinian people, he would be killed. I always refer to Arafat's death as untimely death, because if he had only died 4 years earlier, I think there might have been peace. And I'm not going to say anything about Jimmy Carter, but I just think he has been a force for terrible evil in the Middle East. And his most recent op-ed was so naive and so stupid. The idea that the issue should be turned over to the UN, that the United States should recognize a Palestinian state. What does that do? It disincentivizes the Palestinians to come to the bargaining table. It says to them, you don't have to make sacrifices. You don't have to make compromises. You don't have to negotiate with the Israelis. Jimmy Carter will get you a state. The United States will get you a state. The UN will get you a state. The International Criminal Court will get you a state. The BDS movement will get you a state. There's no surprise that the leadership of the Palestinian Authority is actually against the BDS movement, officially. Because they know that it sends a false message to the Palestinians that they can win this battle without negotiating with the Israelis. And everybody knows that the road to peace has to come through Ramallah. It has to come through Jerusalem.
He goes on to say this, and this is something I agree with wholeheartedly, is that the narrative has to be changed. And he says, what should we do with these Jewish students and other students who come to Israel? Where should they go first? And everybody in the crowd says the Wailing Wall, the Kotel, that type of thing. And he says, yeah, okay, right after that, where should they go? He says they should go to Ramallah. Why? Because they won't see Israeli troops in Ramallah. They'll see people driving around and living in beautiful homes. They'll see shopping malls. They'll see people living in prosperity. The supposedly occupied West Bank that's under military occupation. This is a false narrative that's come about. And I salute Professor Dershowitz for speaking the truth. Now, the other thing he talked about, and I don't have time to play the clip of that, this is a picture taken December 25th, 2006 at Amona, as they tried to get rid of this outpost, this settlement that had been built. And it's currently in the news now. There's a bill in front of the Knesset to approve these settlements. And everybody's all upset about, oh, if they approve these settlements, everything will melt down in the Middle East and we'll have another war. And you can find Dershowitz's video online, and he has some comments near the end of his talk about that. In the Wall Street Journal the other day, it said, though, what's going on with this transition to a new president is Trump is proposing a big Mideast strategy shift. That was in the Wall Street Journal on December 13th. In the Capital Journal part. And they said, how do we interpret what Trump is saying about the Middle East? On their face, the columnist says these statements suggest an end to the effort to oust Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. For the effort to throw out Assad is nothing if not an effort to topple a regime. A partnership with Russia in the region for Russian President Vladimir Putin certainly has demonstrated he is willing to join in the effort to defeat the Islamic State. But the result of that may be something that Trump is not planning on, because he also wants to tear up the agreement with Iran. And the columnist, I think, makes a good observation. So teaming up with Russia and tolerating Mr. Assad in Syria to defeat Islamic State could have the unintended consequence of further empowering Iran, much as the war to topple Saddam Hussein in Iraq had the unintended consequence of clearing the path for expanded Iranian influence in the region. A very interesting observation. Caroline Glick picks up a little bit on this, a Trumpian Israeli initiative, in her column on Friday. She says this: when Trump promised to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, his words were greeted with cynicism. But then this week, his senior advisor, Kellyanne Conway, said Trump is serious about moving the embassy to Jerusalem. And she makes this observation: in one fell swoop, the 68-year-old consensus is gone. The consensus being that we can't allow Israel to claim that its capital is Israel. Nobody can put their embassy there. And Trump is saying, I'm not going along with that. I'm going to move my embassy to Jerusalem. Caroline says this: 35 years ago, she draws a historical parallel. On December 14th, 1981, Israel took a Trump-like step. Israel took a wrecking ball to receive wisdom. That day, the Knesset passed the Golan Heights Law. Then Prime Minister Menachem Begin decided on the initiative the day before. In less than 24 hours, the law went from an idea in Begin's head into the law books. Oh, that legislation, good legislation, could get passed that quickly today. The Reagan administration was livid. And remember that the Reagan Secretary of State was James Baker, who was never a friend of Israel. He did not support Israel. Begin had neither asked Ronald Reagan for permission nor given Reagan a heads up on what he was about to do. And what happened? Begin was clearly operating on the basis it's better to ask for forgiveness than for permission protocol. In the event the Americans weren't really mad, Reagan prevented the UN Security Council from sanctioning Israel for its action. The Syrian regime did nothing. The Arab world yawned. And I think she's suggesting that if Trump actually follows through on this, nothing may happen. But the big news of the week in terms of Israel and Bible prophecy, I think, is the naming of the new ambassador of the United States to the Middle East, to Israel, a man named Daniel Friedman. He's a bankruptcy lawyer from New York. He's represented Trump in some of his bankruptcies in the past. He was a partner in a big New York law firm. And everybody is upset on the left. This is just the worst thing that we've ever seen. We can't believe that Trump is doing this. This is going to cause war in the Middle East. And he said in the past, David Friedman has said, Israel's the capital and the embassy should be in Jerusalem. And I intend, when I'm appointed, to get my office in a building in Jerusalem, the capital of Israel. J Street, which is a left-wing, supposedly pro-Jewish, it's really an anti-Jewish organization, is just really upset. And there's a reason why they're upset. Jared Kushner, the Kushner Family Foundation, has donated to West Bank settlement projects, as has David Friedman. He's helped build settlements in what we call the West Bank, Judea and Samaria. Here's a left-wing person from, I can't remember, Jerusalem Voice for Peace or something, talking about what she thinks about Daniel Friedman's appointment.
This appointment really confirms our worst fears about the Trump administration's approach to Israel. What he's really doing with this appointment is empowering the furthest right elements of the Israeli government, far to the right, actually, of Prime Minister Netanyahu. And these policies you mentioned are really about annexation. It's about Israel, contrary to international law, contrary to decades of U.S. policy, taking over the occupied territories and ending the hopes for freedom and equality for Palestinians and for peace-loving Israelis. This is really, like an attack on the aspirations of Palestinians for their freedom, and it could potentially be a powder keg in the region. I mean, I think we all need to be sounding the alarm. These are really absurd positions. Israel already gets the largest aid package from the United States.
Well, she goes on. She rants for a while. Here's what the New York Times editorial said. A dangerous choice for ambassador. He has no, and why? Here are the sins of David Friedman, according to the New York Times. He has no diplomatic experience, unlike nearly every American ambassador who has served in this most sensitive of posts. All of whom have been unsuccessful in achieving peace, by the way, but that's irrelevant to the editors of the New York Times. Has no diplomatic experience. Let's see. Holds extremist views that are radically at odds with American policy and with the views of most Americans. No, he holds, I think, good, solid, common sense views that are at odds with the radical views of the people who've been in charge of the American government, like Barack Obama and Martin Indyke and other ambassadors. He's doubted the need for a two-state solution. He has endorsed continued Israeli settlement of occupied territory, has gone so far as to endorse even the annexation of some of that land where Palestinians hope to build a state of their own. But look, this is what the proposals for a two-state solution say, that Israel's going to get some, they're going to be land swaps. So this is just, he's accused President Obama of anti-Semitism, absurdly, and called supporters of J Street, a liberal American Jewish organization that has lobbied for a two-state solution in the Iran deal, far worse than capos, Jews who turned in their fellow Jews in the Nazi death camps. So Friedman was, Vox says, oh my goodness, this guy is just awful. There was an article, editorial in Haaretz last summer, Trump and the absurdity of America's Israel debate. I won't go into that. Friedman wrote this Israeli National News. Read Peter Beinart. He wrote the thing for the Haaretz. And you'll vote Donald Trump. And so he says this. Listen to what he says. I like this guy. First, Obama's anti-Semitism. Here's the context. Hamas puts on school plays in which 10-year-olds dressed as terrorists plunge fake knives into 10-year-olds dressed as Jews to the delight of the audience and Palestinian Authority leaders. They're supposed to be the moderate ones. Bestow praise upon all participating in the knife intifada. Asked to comment on the unspeakable tragedy of innocent Jewish civilians being murdered by knife-wielding Islamic radicals, Obama and Kerry do little more than condemn the proverbial cycle of violence. I'm sorry, but this is pure and outright murder, and any public figure who finds it difficult to condemn it as such without diluting the message with geopolitical drivel is engaged in blatant anti-Semitism. This guy is going to make heads explode in the Middle East. Second, the wisdom of free stuff for those who engage in advocating the overthrow of the state of Israel. Every civilized country other than Israel punishes treason. In the United States, advocating to overthrow the government by force or violence can get you life in prison. In Israel, Islamic radical citizens speak this way all the time, often on the way back and forth from world-class institutions of higher learning, which they attend for free. Is this a good idea? Is there no minimal allegiance required for Israeli citizenship? Sure seems like a fair question to me. Finally, are J Street supporters really as bad as capos? The answer is no. They are far worse than capos, Jews who turned in their fellow Jews in the Nazi death camps. And he says why? The capos face extraordinary cruelty, and who knows what any of us would have done under those circumstances to save a loved one. But J Street, they are just smug advocates of Israel's destruction, delivered from the comfort of their secure American sofas. It's hard to imagine anyone worse. And so the New York Times says, well, one of the reasons he's a dangerous choice is he would refuse to meet with J Street. And I'm sure I would like to be at that meeting that soon to be, I believe, Ambassador David Friedman would have with J Street. I would love to hear what goes on. As announced that he expects to have his office in Jerusalem, I already mentioned that. And the contested status of Jerusalem should be resolved by negotiation, not by American fiat. And they say the New York Times is upset about that. So, one more thing I want to cover here. Michael Gove, who was the Secretary of State for Justice in Great Britain, a conservative member of Parliament, has an article in Friday's Times of London, an editorial. And he says this, title, Left's Hatred of Israel is Racism in Disguise. Critics of the Jewish state cannot bear the fact that it is a beacon of Western values in a sea of tyranny and despotism. Here's some of what he says. Anti-Semitism isn't a prejudice restricted to the likes of Richard Spencer, Hassan Nasrallah, and Ayatollah al-Khamenei. As befits the world's oldest and most durable hatred, it has many more adherents and has taken many different forms. Anti-Semitism is moved from hatred of Jews on religious or racial grounds to hostility towards the proudest expression of Jewish identity we now have, the Jewish state. And this week, just the other day, in fact Friday, the same day this article came out, Ban Ki-moon gave his final speech to the UN Security Council as he's leaving office. He made reference in that speech to the quartet report about a two-state solution. But then near the end of his speech, he made this very interesting admission.
State. During the past 10 years, I have argued that we must never accept the bias against Israel within UN bodies. Decades of political maneuverings have created a disproportionate volume of resolutions, reports, and conferences criticizing Israel. In many cases, rather than helping the Palestinian cause, this reality has hampered the ability of the UN to fulfill its role effectively. At the same time, Israel must realize that the reality in which...
Well, that's a stunning admission. Ban Ki-moon admitted that the UN is biased against Israel. That's a pretty stunning admission. I'm personally reeling from shock that he actually said it. But I guess when people don't have to pretend to be a crazy leftist and against Israel anymore, when they're not going to get, their salary is ending, then they are willing to tell the truth. Michael Gove continues, no other democracy is on the receiving end of a campaign calling for its people to be shunned and their labor to be blacklisted. The boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement is growing on force on our streets and campuses. Its campaigners argue that we should ignore ideas from Jewish thinkers if those thinkers come from Israel and treat Jewish commerce as a criminal enterprise if that business is carried on in Israel. This is anti-Semitism, impure and simple. It is the latest recrudescence of the age-old demand that the Jews can only live on terms set by others. Once Jews had to live in the ghetto, now they cannot live in their historic home. Surrounded by enemies who sought to strangle it at birth, continually threatened by war and constantly under a terrorist attack, a nation scarcely the size of Wales, I guess Wales must be the size of New Jersey, with no natural resources, half of whose territory is desert, has become a flourishing democracy, a center of scientific innovation, one of the world's major providers of international humanitarian relief, and the only state from Casablanca to Kabul with a free press, free judiciary, a flourishing free enterprise economy, and freedom for people of every sexual orientation to live and love as they wish. We can talk about that later. And that is the reason it attracts such hostility, not because of what Israel does, but because of what it is. So what do? Keep the prejudices, of course, and try to get rid of the fact. Try to undermine, delegitimize, and reduce support for Israel. Make it the only country in the world whose right to exist is called continually into question. Make the belief that the state's survival, Zionism, belief in the state's survival, Zionism, a dirty word. Denounce, as the U.S. president has, a British university for being a Zionist outpost, and instead call organizations pledged to eliminate Israel, such as Hezbollah and Hamas friends, as Jeremy Corbyn has. Anti-Zionism is not brave anti-colonialism and anti-racist stance. It is simply anti-Semitism, minding its manners so it can sit in a seminar room, and as such it deserves to be called out, confronted, and opposed, because the fate of the Jewish people and the survival of the Jewish state are critical tests for all of us. The darkest forces of our time, Islamic State, the Iranian leaders masterminding mass murder in Aleppo, are united by one thing above all, their hatred of the Jewish people and their home. Faced with such implacable hatred and knowing where it has always led, we should not allow anti-Semitism any space to advance or incubate. Instead, we should show that we're not going to be intimidated by those who want to treat Israel as a second-class state. We're not going to indulge the anti-Semitic impulse to apply the double standard. Israel is the only state where we don't locate our embassy in the nation's capital, and the only ally in the Foreign Office has refused to let the Queen visit. I have one more thing and I'm done. Melanie Phillips has a great article. You can get it at melaniephillips.com. Going Wherever the Evidence Lead is the title of her blog. And here is a title, Mrs. May's False Note. Theresa May went to the Conservative Friends of Israel in England, in London, I believe the meeting was, and she gave this speech. I want you to listen to this carefully, because I think this shows that the problem is much, much deeper than we would like to believe. Notice the equivalency that she makes.
When talking about global obligations, we must be honest with our friends like Israel, because that is what true friendship is about. That's why we have been clear about building new illegal settlements. It is wrong, it is not conducive to peace, and it must stop. In order to help people of all backgrounds reach their potential, we need to remove the barriers that stand in their way, and that includes bigotry, discrimination, and hatred. Let me be clear. It is unacceptable that there is anti-Semitism in this country. It is... No matter what Labour say or sing, they cannot ignore what has been happening in their party. Anti-Semitism should have no place in politics and no place in this country. And I'm proud to lead a party that takes the firmest stand against it. And as a government, we're making a real difference. Indeed, when I was Home Secretary, we took what I believe was an important step, engaging a truer picture of the problem, requiring all police forces to record religious hate crimes separately by faith. And I made sure we kept extremism, including the sort that peddles anti-Semitic vitriol, out of our country. That's why I said no to so-called comedians like Diodone coming to Britain. It's why I stopped Pamela Geller, Robert Spencer, and Pastor Terry Jones coming too, since Islamophobia comes from the same wellspring of hatred.
Okay, and that's just a stupid statement, okay? And so I do think there's a major problem. So while Britain sort of comes out as a friend of Israel, they don't understand the nature of the problem that they face. So when Pamela Geller and Robert Spencer, who blog about Islam, want to go to England to do a conference, she was the person who kept them out. And she's defending it yet today. And so there's a major problem there. As Melanie Phillips said, her thinking is profoundly flawed. Islamophobia does not come from the same wellspring of hatred as anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is a true prejudice because the hatred and demonization it promotes derive entirely from lies and a repudiation of rationality itself. Islamophobia is a false allegation of prejudice which is deployed to silence rational criticism based on actual facts about attitudes and practices within the Islamic world. And she's right. So, well, we'll cover some of this stuff next week, including some of the things from Foreign Affairs about pushing for a one world government. We don't have time to go into it today. The new Foreign Affairs is called Out of Order, the Future of the International System. And they want to push, in fact, Richard Haass, who's the president of the Council on Foreign Relations, former administration member in many different administrations, says the case World Order 2.0. It's an interesting article. I'll talk about that next week. So let's pray. You know, look, all this stuff is lining up, just as we've talk about week after week, and it's happening very quickly. It's happening more intensely by the week. Let's pray. Father, thanks for this day, Lord. I pray that you'll use this to wake people up, that the time is short, and people need to make a decision about their relationship with Jesus Christ, because there will come a time when the time for decision is over. And I just pray that anyone hearing this, Lord, will be provoked to consider their relationship with God and their need for a Savior, and the perfect Savior that we have in Jesus Christ. Bless us as we go this week. In Jesus' name, amen.